Thank you everyone for joining us. You have reached the Mountain States Regional Genetics Network Genetics Pop-Up for 2022. We are so glad to have you all here. Tonight's theme is Ask a Genetic Navigator, and we are excited to introduce you to some of our genetic navigators on the call tonight. My name is Christy Weiss. I am the projects manager for Mountain States. And I started with Mountain States in a role similar to many of our genetic navigators, which was navigating my own daughter's genetic journey. So with that, I just have a little bit of Zoom logistics in this virtual world that we are in now. Just a quick review, if you're new to Zoom or would like just a quick review, you can do mute and unmute. That's can be found by number 1. Number 2 is for your video, turning your video on and off. You're welcome to turn your camera on. We are recording tonight up until the question and answer period. So if you prefer to keep your video off, that's okay too. The active participant list can be found at number 3. And number 4 is the chat feature for Q&A or technical issues. Cody and Jay are helping me tonight on the technical issues, but feel free to message any of us and we can help as we're able. And then one other just reminder, when we get to the question and answer portion, we are going to ask that you raise your hand if you have a question and wait to be called on. You can also use the chat feature if you feel more comfortable typing your question. But when you look for that raising your hand option, you can find it under the reactions tab at the bottom of your screen. And then we'll be able to lower your hand after we've called on you and you've asked your question. All right.
Christy, if I can interrupt you for a second, it looks like we can see your view, who's in the meeting, and that's kind of blocking some of the slides.
Oops, sorry. Let me see if I can.
There.
Yeah, am I still, that's still up?
Yeah,
Stop sharing it. And do it one more time.
And I'm gone. Okay.
Let's see.
Okay.
Any better? Nope.
It's still there, but if it's off to the side, I suppose we should be okay.
Okay, I'll leave it up there at the top. So just a little bit of what we're going to be doing tonight. This is our agenda. We have an icebreaker planned here. Don't worry, we won't put you on the spot for the icebreaker. And then a family story. One of our genetic navigators is going to share their story. We have a video to show you, and then we are going to turn it over to you all to ask your questions about genetics. These genetics pop-ups really started as a safe place for families to explore genetics, to get resources about genetics, and to ask questions about genetics. So there is no wrong question here tonight. We want to make sure that you feel comfortable asking your questions. We don't guarantee that we have all the answers, but we will do our very best to get you some resources and answers to the questions that you have. With that, we're going to start off with our icebreaker, and I'll just ask you to practice finding your chat at the bottom of your screen with your Zoom controls. And what do you think of when you hear the word genetics? What comes to your mind when you hear the word genetics? If you can type, just brainstorm just the first words that come to your mind. If you can type those in the chat, that would be great. Let's see. Family, anyone else? Sequencing, great. I'm going to give you a couple of ideas here with this next little graphic. Family history, that's another great one. Here's some words in this graphic that might resonate with you when you hear genetics: complex, medical, biology, great. Here's some other word clouds that CRISPR technology has been in the news a lot. Sequencing, exomes, inherited, great. Deletion, worries, that's a good one too. Medical, I got nothing. Okay, that's okay too. All right, well, thanks for sharing your thoughts and ideas on those. This is just genetics is such a widespread world of lots of different words, lots of different meanings of words. And really, we're here tonight to talk about genetic conditions in the pediatric population. So for children, our funding comes from HRSA. I had a slide up with that earlier. And so HRSA stands for Health Resources Service Administration, and they fund our grant through their Maternal and Child Health Bureau. So this just brings me to this slide to ask, do you know someone with a genetic condition? And on first glance, maybe some of us do, some of us don't, but these are some statistics that might help you think about genetic conditions in a much more common way than maybe some of us think about them. 1 in 9 children admitted to a hospital has a genetic condition or genetic disorder. And just a note for this word here, I put a note down at the bottom. The words genetic disorder, genetic condition, genetic disease, genetic diagnosis, genetic difference are sometimes all used interchangeably in the medical field. So I don't mean to offend anybody by using one of the terms over another, but these statistics here came from the Texas Department of Health website, and they chose to use the word disorder. So we're quoting them here tonight. So 1 in 12 adults admitted to the hospital has a genetic disorder. 1 in 22 people in the United States has a genetic disorder. And unfortunately, 20 to 30% of all infant deaths are due to genetic disorders. Another way to think about this, and this is just a recent study that came out of the work of a group that we work with called the National Coordinating Center, and individuals that work there. This is a prevalence. This is a prevalence study from 2016. And this study found that 3.9% of children reported having a genetic condition. And so I've made this little graphic.
I just had my headsets on.
I made this graphic over here with 100 little heads, little people. And so that's about 4 out of 100 people or children reporting having a genetic condition in the year 2016 to 2017. To give you a little bit of a visual there. So chances are a lot of us probably do know someone who has a genetic condition. For many of you, you might be joining tonight because you have a loved one or someone close to you that may be on a genetic diagnostic journey or has been diagnosed with a genetic condition. So we welcome you and we thank you for being here tonight. We do these pop-ups around Rare Disease Day, which was on Monday. And Rare Disease Day is a day that is celebrated worldwide. And because Mountain States represents all genetic conditions, not just one specific diagnosis over another, we find that Rare Disease Day is one of the days that we can raise awareness and talk about all of our genetic conditions. It's estimated that 72% of genetic conditions of rare diseases are genetic in nature. 70% of genetic rare diseases start in childhood. And then there are over 6,000 identified rare diseases and probably more than that genetic conditions. And then that 300 million people worldwide are living with a rare disease. So when we started these pop-ups a couple of years ago, we've always held them around this time of year around Rare Disease Day. With that, I'd like to introduce you to some of our genetic navigators that we have joining us. Here is a picture of all 8 of our genetic navigators. We have 1 genetic navigator in each one of our 8 states in our region. And tonight we have 4 of them that will be answering your questions. But before we tell you who's going to be answering your questions tonight, I would like to switch over to our genetic navigator from Wyoming, Melody. And she is going to share her story tonight, her family's story. So with that, I'm going to stop sharing my screen and I will ask if we can get Melody up here. There she is. And I'll turn off my video and I'll turn the floor over to you, Melody.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for the opportunity to share and for your time coming on this evening to talk about genetics. So I was asked to just share a little bit about my family's story, our genetic journey that we took. And my 7-year-old son has a rare genetic disorder called Hurler syndrome. And probably the longest year of my life was his first year of his life. And it was really something that I had never thought about genetics, never came to mind. And even once I had my son and we found that he had lots of just abnormal things going on with his health. We dealt with a week in the NICU when he was first born. He had issues swallowing at first and gaining weight. He had a hernia, a double hernia, pretty young. And so we went on a journey of just not even chasing signs and symptoms, but just reacting to medical things that came up with him. And after his 1-year well child visit, that was the first time that we had ever considered genetics as the source of the issue for my son. And at that time, we were going in just to discuss some things that we had further seen with him, and that was a pretty significant spinal deformity that was starting to become more prevalent. And that was the big marker for us, where our doctor finally paused and said, I think we need to step back and look at the bigger picture. And so 2 weeks after his first birthday, we went to a geneticist for the first time. And I literally walked into that appointment thinking, he cannot have a genetic disorder. We have no family history of anything. I was pretty ignorant about different ways that you can inherit different genetic disorders. And sure enough, we get the answer that he has Hurler syndrome. And so at 1 year of age, we dealt with swallowing disorder, the hernias that I mentioned. He also had cloudy corneas. So his eyes always looked hazy, which I was told kids can grow out of. We were also seeing significant developmental delays across the board. So he had started speech, PT and OT. So he had a lot of therapeutic services. And then he also had that spinal deformity, but we had to kind of pause on those things and deal with suddenly going into pretty intense treatment. We went through a bone marrow transplant, spent a lot of time meeting new specialists, running tests, finding out what was going on with his heart, finding out what was going on with his overall orthopedic situation. And so for me, we were thrust into a lot of support, and I was very thankful at that time for the hospital social workers, and they really sat down and helped us to navigate in that moment all of the things that we needed to support our son. Where I came to the point where I was feeling like I was struggling in my own navigation is when we started moving. And we have moved several times since my son's diagnosis, sometimes for work, sometimes to try to find try to be closer to family support, because we have been through so much. We wanted to be closer to a better support system. And as we moved to different states, I found it really difficult to figure out who I needed to talk to and what questions I needed to ask. And we had to reapply for insurances and figure out who our new doctors were going to be, and going to pediatricians who didn't want to immediately send referrals or had a lot of questions about even his diagnosis at first. And so I have had multiple opportunities, and now being in Wyoming, we've been in Wyoming for 3 years. And so experiencing also now needing to access care for my son out of state, because we go to Denver for all of his major medical needs. And so as I was going through those journeys, that really is what led me to connect to Mountain States, and getting connected to them and wanting to have the opportunity to run into and rub shoulders with other families that are saying, I just don't know what to do next, because that was my biggest thing. We'd go to a new place and it's like, where do I even begin? Who do I call about insurance? Who do I call about medical? Who do I call about getting clinical therapies in order? And so now that I have jumped through those hoops multiple times, I'm just very thankful to say that my son is doing well and healthy, and has everything that he needs to thrive and have as best quality of life as we can give him. And everything that I have learned along the way, if I have the opportunity to help others, that's what I want to do. So appreciate your time.
Thank you so much, Melody, for sharing your story. I really, really appreciate your transparency and your journey, and so glad to hear that he is doing well and thriving right now. That is awesome news. So I am going to now share our video that some of our genetic navigators are starring in. This video we put together because I asked them a question. What were their questions that they had when they first started navigating their own journeys? So that's where this video came from, and I'm going to share it now. Hopefully the sound will be okay. So just give me a note in the chat if for some reason you can't hear it. Let's see. Make sure we've got the right one up. Okay, here we go. Hello, and thank you for a few short minutes of your time. Let me tell you a little bit about the Mountain States Regional Genetics Network. Who is Mountain States Regional Genetics Network, or MSRGN for short, you might ask? MSRGN is a regional network consisting of 8 states: Texas, New Mexico, Arizona, Nevada, Utah, Colorado, Wyoming, Montana, and we are funded federally by HRSA that funds the 7 regional genetics networks, which includes MSRGN, along with the Family Center and the National Coordinating Center. The mission of the regional genetics networks is to increase access to genetic services for individuals and their families, including those who are underserved in our region. In 2021, Mountain States Regional Genetics Network selected 8 individuals who had navigated the genetic journey for their own loved ones in their own state. These individuals became our genetic navigators and are now available to help families navigate genetics. Genetic navigators offer resources, guidance, and navigation to others from a perspective of someone who has been there and done that and has been on a genetics path and journey for their own loved ones. Sometimes we all just need a helping hand. The ultimate goal of the program is navigating to hope for families who may be filled with questions, who may be looking for resources, or who may be experiencing barriers to accessing genetic services in their state. Anyone who has ever been on a genetics journey has been filled with questions. Today, we will be sharing questions that our own genetic navigators had when they first started navigating for their own families.
I think the biggest question I had when we first started thinking about what we needed from the genetics world was how to get that genetics referral. My son had Down syndrome diagnosis at birth, and so the idea that we would need to revisit genetics was hard for some of the specialists to wrap their brains around, but because he was declining rapidly and no one could come up with a solution, trying to navigate that route to getting the actual referral was more difficult than I had anticipated. So that advocacy piece of being able to say, this is why I want genetics for my son and why I think it will be helpful. I think those are the questions that if I had been more prepared to answer, maybe I would have been able to get the referral a little easier.
So I didn't have a big question starting out the genetics journey with my family. Having worked in healthcare and worked with kids with many of the known genetic disorders. So I was fairly confident that my children didn't have one of the known disorders. And I was skeptical that we would even find anything since whole exome and whole genome sequencing weren't available at the time. My main concern was getting some sort of diagnosis or a report that would allow me to get services for my children, insurance coverage, and to find direction in how to help them.
This question I have all throughout the process, but a part of the process that stands out to me is when we had just started our genetic testing journey, and I started conversing with other rare families and went to an international or a national conference on rare disease. And I started to learn that not all hospitals were the same, not all doctors were the same. And so that became my question, is like, how do I know what's really available to my child for genetic testing? Because I'm realizing then that it depends on the doctor and what they want to offer, and of course insurance. And so I had to do some research. I still don't think I could completely answer that question.
I think my biggest question was what now, which feels very broad, but with our condition, there was so many things to plan and do. We went from just having some very general therapeutic services to needing so many specialists, to needing to add insurances, to figuring out access to doctors who even knew what his condition was. And it felt very overwhelming. We had not thought about genetics. We weren't looking for a genetic diagnosis. So I didn't think genetics until the day that we got our diagnosis for our son when he was 1. So you don't just get hit with your kid has this condition, you get hit with, and now we've got to do this, and we've got to apply for this insurance, and we've got to put all these things in place. And so that first couple of months was just so overwhelming. And then treatment too, like treatment was very overwhelming. With all of the things that we suddenly knew that he needed, and he needed it now.
I think the biggest question I had was my daughter was diagnosed with cystic fibrosis. So they use what's called a sweat test. It's sort of the standard test for diagnosing CF. And it's just, they collect sweat and they measure how much chloride. And then infants, young children who have really high levels, that's a positive for probably having CF. And then my daughter had genetic testing. So I'll say, going into genetic testing, I was just so relieved to have a diagnosis, because she was a really sick little baby. I was just so relieved. And when they did the genetic testing and then came back and told me these letters and numbers, Delta F508, I wanted to know, what does that mutation, how does that impact her? Because cystic fibrosis, at that time, they knew there were hundreds of different genetic mutations that cause CF. Now they know there's at least 2,000. And I wanted to know, so this mutation correlates with what? Like genotype, phenotype. This mutation correlates to what severity of disease? So I had questions about that. And then I had questions, I think, like most moms, what can I do? What can I do to keep her healthy? What can I do to make sure she lives and has the best quality of life? Those were my biggest questions.
I appreciate the opportunity to think about this question. It took 12 years for us to diagnose my daughter, and the whole time we were working with genetics. So the biggest question I started to have was, what happens, or how do we proceed when you have a person who you think has a genetic diagnosis, but every year and every test you do comes back with no answer? And for us, that was to do the whole exome sequencing.
Thank you for your time today in listening to our video. If you would like to connect with the Genetic Navigator for your state, please go to the Mountain States website, www.mountainstatesgenetics.org/GN. There you will find our 8 genetic navigators and their email address, and you can reach out to them and contact them that way. In addition, if you have further questions about Mountain States or would like to connect with our network, please reach out to us on the Contact tab at our website. We'd also like to thank our funders, HRSA, for their support of our program. All right, thank you very much for listening to our video. And with that, I'm going to go back to our, go back to our PowerPoint here. And next up, we have our gift card drawing. So with that, I'd like to ask Cody and Jay to pop into the chat. We have a little form and we have some gift cards we'd like to do a drawing for. We'll notify the winners by email. But if you'd like to be part of our gift card drawing, just as a thank you for being here tonight, don't leave. This is just the midway intermission. We want to go ahead and ask you that to fill out this gift card form. It's not required to fill out if you don't want to be entered in to the gift card drawing. But if you would like to be entered into the gift card drawing, this form will be your entry into that drawing. So I will let people do that while I am sharing my screen again. And let's see if it works this time. So those are just real short forms. I'll just ask your name, your city, your state, your zip code, and the category you identify with for our grant purposes. So we appreciate you filling that information out if you want to be part of the gift card drawing. With that, we're going to shift gears and go into a Q&A time. And so the way we're going to do this, let me get my list up here so I can see when people's hands are raised. The way we're going to do this, just as a reminder, to raise your hand. If you do have a question, you can also use the chat feature. But if you are looking for that raise hand button, you can find that down at the bottom of your Zoom controls there with the reactions button. And then there's a raise hand that you can click on. And so when you raise your hand, it'll show up on my participant list here and I can call on you and you can unmute your line and ask your question live to our panel. And tonight we have on our panel, Jamie from Colorado, Jen Bana from Montana, Tristan from Utah, and Melody from Wyoming. And they will be our 4 genetic navigators that are available tonight to answer your questions. I'll be also available to chime in need be. But with that, I'm going to stop sharing my screen so you can see all of their lovely faces and just ask them all to turn their cameras on if they're not on already. And let's see.